and their guns. Oh my God, what have they done to the town I loved so well?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Minty Thompson, and I am a director of the Bloody Sunday Trust, who have organised this very important series of events to mark the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. I am also the daughter of Kathleen Thompson, a mother of 6 children who was murdered in the back garden of our home 50 years ago last November. So I know, like the Bloody Sunday families and so many others, what it's like to live with the enduring pain caused by the violence of our conflict. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming our very special guest to deliver the annual Bloody Sunday lecture. Our guest today is someone who has proven throughout his long career that he fully recognises the truth of our theme: one world, one struggle. Someone who has always taken a stand with the oppressed and against inequality and injustice. He has campaigned against apartheid in South Africa and for freedom in Palestine. He has opposed the unjust wars, successive British governments, and supported progressive regimes around the world. He was one of the few members of the British Parliament to take a genuine interest in what was happening in Ireland and supported the campaigns to release the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4. He worked for peace in Ireland at a time when it was very unpopular to do so, recognising that all sides needed to be involved if the conflict was to end. He has always been a good friend to the Bloody Sunday families and has taken part in many events in support of their campaign for truth and justice. So it is fitting that he is here today for such an important event. As our speaker today, he follows in the footsteps of his late and very well-respected friend, Tony Benn, who we were honoured to host as a lecture speaker in 2004. The MP for Islington North since 1983 and the former leader of the Labour Party. I am pleased to introduce Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that wonderful, very warm welcome in this wonderful building here, this Guildhall. Can I start by saying big thanks to Minty Thompson for the introduction she just did, the organisers of this event and all the other events of the last few days, the Bloody Sunday Trust, and in particular Tony Doherty, Maeve McLaughlin, Adrian Kerr, Declan McLaughlin, and Ciara O'Connor. Thanks also to the Museum of Free Derry, which I've been to see, and to Cregan Enterprises for hosting this visit and the fantastic job they do in promoting cooperatives and inclusion and community on the Cregan. And many, many friends here that I've known for a very long time who've given their lives to peace and justice that long, lonely, often very frustrating road when you're trying to get to the heart of the matter and to get to truth. And I want to thank all of them. I'm delighted that Colm Eastwood MP is here today, who did a great question the other day in Parliament. Mark Durkan, former MP. Old friend Mitchell McLaughlin. He and I used to meet during the dark days of the travel ban in my back garden to discuss matters of interest. He thought nobody was listening. I was extremely suspicious of my dog, of what it was doing at that time. Deputy Mayor Christopher Jackson and all the staff here at the Guildhall. And I'd like you also to give a very warm welcome to my great friend, the former General Secretary of Unite, Len McCluskey, who's down here as well. And also to thank my wife, Laura Alvarez, for all that she puts up with in all the journeys and travels that we make. And to all of you, thank you. It's a great honour and privilege to have been invited to give this Bloody Sunday memorial lecture. I'm humbled and honoured to do this on the 50th anniversary of that absolutely historic day. And the welcome that I've had here in Derry and this morning over in Donegal is fantastic. And yesterday we planted an oak tree to mark the 30th anniversary of Cregan Enterprise. And that oak tree we planted along with children from St John's and Holy Child primary schools and women from Rathmore 50+ Club. That oak tree is a beacon. That oak tree is a beacon of hope for the future. And an oak tree is the most significant tree of any sort because of the biodiversity it brings. And the Rathmore Centre, which serves as a fantastic beacon for an outstanding community spirit that goes with it. At the centre yesterday, I met with Unheard Voices, a support group of relatives of the victims of violence, standing together in solidarity and grief as they attempt to heal the deep wounds of the past. But what struck me in that and other discussions with people at the centre was the way in which women bear the brunt of so much of this, bear the brunt of trying to hold families together, of supporting children going through mental health stress, and they themselves often withholding any expression of their own anguish because they want to be strong for their children, their relatives, and their family. And so I say to the women of Cregan, of Bogside, and of Derry, fantastic things you've done, fantastic things you do, and the role of women in all of our struggles should be better and better recognised than it is. And I was delighted that the museum is now apparently completely run by women. Seemed to be the case anyway. I was also very honoured to meet the pupils of St Joseph's and St Celia's School and had very wide-ranging discussion with them. They're inspiring, they're optimistic, they're imaginative, they're musical, and they're hopeful. I want them to grow up in a Derry, a city of Derry, free of deprivation that was inflicted on this city by so many successive governments and administrations. We want a future for them, because this is a city where housing was left to rot, railways closed, a city that was refused its own university, denied the economic support it deserved, resulting in catastrophic unemployment, underemployment, and poverty. And a city where still the average wage is much less, I believe half that of Belfast. Yesterday I spoke with a group of sixth formers, and they look to the future with optimism, hopes for the new university, which I absolutely support, a university in Derry to give that beacon, and further opportunities on the Cregan and on Bogside. But what brings us together today is Bloody Sunday. Half a century ago, in an era when people around the world were rising up to demand civil rights, protesters came onto the streets of this city, peaceful protesters, to march against the most flagrant denials of those rights. The protest of the 30th of January 1972 was against internment without trial, a grotesque example of the discrimination faced by the community at that time, but one introduced precisely because of their resistance to second-class status when it came to jobs, housing, and representation. Think about it, internment without trial. That's the stuff of dictatorships in other parts of the world. And those protesters were gunned down on the streets, shot as they fled marauding soldiers intent on killing, shot in the back as they ran, shot as they tried to crawl to safety, shot as they lay wounded on that cold ground on that day. 13 innocent civilians, a number of them only 17 years old, almost children, were shot dead by those paratroopers. A 14th died later from his injuries. Their names ring out across the years, and their young ages still have the power to shock. When you look at the memorial and you see the ages on it, you just feel a sense of horror. And the names that are there inscribed in the church and were read out yesterday by Bishop McKeon in a beautiful service that was held last night. I'll read the names now because I think we should all think of those names. Gerard Donaghy, 17. John Duddy, 17. Hugh Gilmore, 17. Michael Kelly, 17. Kevin McElhinney, 17. John Young, 17. William Nash, 19. Michael MacDade, 20. James Ray, 22. William McKinney, 27. Patrick Doherty, 31. Gerard McKinney, 35. Bernard McGuigan, 41. And John Johnson, 59. In the video that's shown in the museum, Eamon McCann says, in response to the eventual result of the inquiry, that nothing would have happened without the work of the families and the community and their determination. I want to pay tribute to the families and the victims and many more who were wounded over the years that came on and overcoming all they faced. But in adversity, as all of the people of Ireland know full well, it's the literature of Ireland that describes as much of the history of Ireland and the feelings of the people of Ireland than all the textbooks and history books combined. And it's poetry and music that is written in a place of adversity that makes a massive difference. And I'm a great admirer of the works of Seamus Heaney, and indeed Michael D. Higgins, the president, gave me a full volume of Seamus Heaney's works. And after Bloody Sunday, he wrote The Road to Derry as he came from Belfast on the day of the funerals. I'm sure many of you have heard the poem before, but I think something that was published on the 25th anniversary of the massacre, it's very appropriate to read it on now the 50th anniversary. Along Glen Shane and Fore Glen, and the cold woods of Hill Head, a wet wind in the hedges and a dark cloud on the mountain, and flags like black frost, mourning that the 13 men were dead. The roe wept at Dungiven, and the foil cried out to heaven. Burntollet's old wound opened, and again the bogside bled. By Shipquay Gate I shivered, and by Lone Moor I inquired, where I might find the coffins, where the 13 men lay dead. My heart besieged by anger, my mind a gap of danger, I walked among their old haunts, the home ground where they bled, and in the dirt lay justice like an acorn in the winter, till its oak would sprout in Derry, where the 13 men lay dead. In the dirt lay justice like an acorn in winter. It's because of those that fought for justice from that day to this, those who kept the pressure up, despite the disgraceful whitewash of the Widgery Tribunal, that we finally saw some of the truth emerge from the Savile inquiry, and the British government, in the person of David Cameron, forced to make a substantial statement to Parliament on that day. The movement for justice was centred here in Derry, of course, but it was also international. Just as the world watched Derry on the day of the funeral of those 13, the world watched Derry on the day of that result. Something people may not know, that there were many other demonstrations around the world. A week after Bloody Sunday, we organised a march in London from Kilburn to Whitehall, carrying mock coffins to lay at the gate of Downing Street, to lay there for the then Prime Minister to see. And we marched there, and I was one of the people that, when we arrived in Trafalgar Square, was arrested as part of a whole gang of a lot of other people being arrested. And a lot of us were convicted, and then we appealed our convictions, and I won my appeal with the assistance of a little-known barrister called Michael Mansfield, who has done fantastic service for justice then, now, and so many other occasions. But it was that sense of solidarity of people all around the world and all around Britain that I think made a very big difference. But every single obstacle was put in the way of those seeking justice, trying to find their way to the truth. The victims were blamed. The media got hold of the story, the army press releases and the briefings that went on. They were blamed for being victims, like somehow or other it was their fault they were there and shot dead by soldiers. A tribunal was established to try and vindicate the killers, compounding the injustice. Records and guns were destroyed. D-notices to prevent discussion in the media were issued, and the dead were vilified. These insults to the bereaved were allowed to continue for decades. Remember, it was 50 years ago tomorrow since Bloody Sunday, but it's only been 12 years since that unambiguous exoneration of all of those victims. All of those years, there was this question mark that somehow or other the victims were the guilty ones. But of course, the statement by the Prime Minister does not equal justice. So while we're here today to remember the lives lost, there are still some, including many in Westminster, who want to put justice out of reach and secure immunity for those who committed crimes in the service of the British state, with the deployment here in Northern Ireland. Those people stand in defiance of our common humanity. We must never shrink from holding to account apologists for brutality and murder. There are still others who rally to the side of the killers, who even fly the flag of the parachute regiment on the outskirts of Derry. And a few days ago in Westminster, Colum Eastwood MP asked the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland if he thought the parachute regiment should apologise for the actions of their soldiers on Bloody Sunday. Of course they should. Well done, Colum, for asking that question. But people need more than apologies. First, here in Derry, the state can begin to redress the wrongs of the past by ending the economic injustice that afflicted this city both before and after Bloody Sunday. The state should be supporting growth in Derry, investing in infrastructure and a university the city deserves, and backing the amazing work already being done by the community itself. Secondly, it's an outrage that nobody has been prosecuted for the deaths of 14 innocent civilian protesters. And it's a double outrage that the British government is now planning legislation to make it even harder for such an effort to succeed at any time in the future. That would be the effect of the forthcoming amnesty bill, which would stop any prosecution, investigation, judicial review, inquest or civil case connected with killings which occurred before 1998. It would shut down all future inquiries into the state's actions during the Troubles. Such a law, had it already been in force, think about this, would have prohibited the Savile inquiry. It simply could not have taken place because of the actions of that particular piece of legislation. Introducing a statute of limitation for the atrocities that took place in Ireland amounts to nothing short of complicity in covering up the truth and ensures that the lessons are not fully learnt. The idea that we must move on without examining the state's own accountability has quite rightly enraged a lot of people of the North as a whole. The amnesty bill passing into law would entrench injustice and actually be an insult to us all. We will oppose this bill in the strongest terms that we can. It has to be opposed. The longing for justice runs through the history of Ireland like a bright green thread. Ireland was the proving ground for English colonialism, where the English and then the British learnt their trade of plunder and empire. The sequence is well known. Conquest, plantation, Cromwell's mass murder, the penal laws, the Great Hunger. But during all of that, it was people in Ireland that made their voices known, and it was Irish people in other parts of the world, where they'd gone to America, to Canada, to Australia, to South Africa, and many other places, who expressed their solidarity with other struggles around the world. For example, the United Irishmen in 1798 expressed in the strongest terms their opposition to the slave trade, opposition to slavery, and their support for the revolution in Haiti led by Toussaint Louverture. They expressed their solidarity, and that was something that was very important because they were saying the treatment of Irish people in their poverty was akin to the slavery that the African people on the plantations in the Caribbean were suffering at that time. And that was an important inspiration to Toussaint and the people that were fighting for their rights and their independence. 50 years later, it was crucial activity, support by Irish soldiers in the war between Mexico and the United States, when the Irish soldiers felt they didn't think Mexico should be invaded by the United States, so they switched sides and joined the Mexicans and helped to ensure the independence of Mexico. And they are revered in Mexico as the heroes of the San Patricio Brigade. It was that sense of international solidarity that is important. And the Easter Rising, doomed perhaps against the strongest superpower in Earth in 1916, drew on those traditions that spanned Irish politics, from conservatism to Marxism. But I want to dwell, if I may, for just a moment on James Connolly, one of the leaders of the Easter Rising, and what we can learn about the struggle for justice from his politics. Connolly was not only a nationalist, although he gave his life to that cause, but was also an international socialist, born in Edinburgh, deeply involved in political movements in Scotland, in Ireland, and on 2 very extended visits to the United States, where he campaigned for socialism across the United States. And when, sadly, Connolly was killed, executed after the Easter Rising, they killed a brilliant man and a brilliant mind. And I just wonder how much more he could have achieved and could have written along with the others that were executed at that time. He was an inspiration to many people, including Constance Markievicz. Constance Markievicz went on to become the first woman elected to the Westminster Parliament in 1918, and she came, I'm proud to say, from my constituency, not because she wanted to live there. She was in Holloway Prison at the time, and therefore was unable to leave anyway, but she wouldn't have taken a seat even if she had been allowed to leave prison. But she was the first woman elected to the British Parliament. So why are the causes of socialism and national liberation so entwined throughout history? I think it's because the fight of the underdog against an oppressor, be it the state or the ruling class, forges that solidarity and awareness of common humanity. That common humanity has been epitomised by so many in the history of this island, running right up to the present. It can be seen in the work of great people here, like the late Pat Foonican and the Pat Foonican Centre, and all that they do to campaign for and bring about justice. And I know there are people from the Foonican Centre here today. I thank them for what they do, and I absolutely welcome them to here. The British Security Services colluded in Pat's murder. Could there be a clearer example of how the struggle for political and social justice has often been met by brutal force of the state? Peace in Ireland, contrary to what some people might believe, has been built by the people in spite of state violence against them. Governments and cabinets didn't build peace. People here did. You did. And the reality is that true justice, historical, social and economic, can be denied by governments, but it can only be secured by the people themselves. It's popular movements that bring about change. It's popular movements that achieve social justice. Which moves me on then to the Good Friday Agreement. It acknowledged the Irish people's right to their self-determination if certain conditions were met in the future. So when the provisions of the border poll were included in the 1998 Belfast Agreement, it seemed then like a remote possibility. But in the years since, there has been a social transformation. If someone had told me at the time of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 that abortion and gay marriage would be legal throughout the island of Ireland in 2021, I would have said, dream on. It's not going to happen. Yet it has. Things have changed. People young and old, from different religions, from the north and the south, have come together to campaign for many of those social advances. They know that discrimination in any form is wrong. This society that no longer is two separate communities, always at loggerheads, things have changed a great deal. The role of the Catholic and Protestant churches are very different now to what they were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. There's also been a significant migration to Ireland and a significant refugee population in Ireland who are making a massive contribution to the lives of all of us, as they do in England and other places as well. And the economy across this island has to become more integrated. The effects of Brexit have brought that home to just about everybody, but perhaps not Boris Johnson. What was once seen as a remote possibility, a border poll, is now the subject of serious discussion throughout Ireland. There's a broad and lively public debate about the shape that a new united Ireland could take, with public meetings letting those at the grassroots express their hopes for the future. Many envisaged a new Ireland, civil rights would be top of the agenda, finally delivered for all people, Protestant, Catholic, dissenters, non-religious, everybody. People who regard themselves as British, Irish or Northern Irish. But the fact that it is now on the agenda shines a light on the role of the British government in triggering any border poll. The Good Friday Agreement is actually a bit vague on how the border poll will come about. Under the agreement, if any time it appears likely to the Secretary of State that a majority of those voting in the North would express a wish that Northern Ireland cease to be part of the United Kingdom and form part of United Ireland, then the Secretary of State is required to call a poll. Not clear quite how this appearance is going to come before the Secretary of State. But what actually does likely mean? How would it be determined? An opinion poll, election results, some other means? But given the changes in society, It can no longer just be based on religion or historic allegiances. And who would be able to vote? None of this is defined. The vagueness of the agreement affords the British government a huge and potentially big opportunity to use their discretion in what would not be a very helpful way. It could play a very negative role by delaying the poll or fixing the timing of the franchise to its advantage. So what we need from the government and the opposition in Westminster is clarity. The British government especially has an obligation to explain how the poll will be triggered, and I call on them to begin that process so we can have that understanding and that discussion. And I would say this: it's far too important and sensitive an issue for British politicians to use as a prop to wrap themselves up in a flag and just proclaim devotion to the Union. Any border poll, the British and Irish governments must remain neutral. That is absolutely clear. That is their obligation and their responsibility. I may hope to see a border poll happen. Others may have a different view. But the principle is that it's the people of this island who must decide their own future. Then there are broader lessons. The fact that we're talking about democratic mechanisms for self-determination is a testament to how far we've come since the 30th of January 1972, and of how people can overcome seemingly insurmountable power. The people of Derry did that and are still doing it. Half a century on, there isn't just a fight for accountability, but Irish people are finally able to reach towards self-determination and social justice, although massive obstacles remain. Their efforts are an inspiration, not just here, but throughout the world. In places as far-flung as Palestine, the occupation widely seen as a parallel to what's happening here. Wherever there is colonial rule, occupation, and denial of self-determination, it's followed by repression, by massacres, by cover-ups. We've seen that again and again, including other places, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, where countless lives have been lost and justice has been absent without leave. The atrocities of colonialism and empire can never be accepted and will never be forgotten. The growth of Black Lives Matters all around the world has given people some sense of hope and some renewed necessity to understand the reality of their own history and of colonial history in order to pursue that fight for dignity and democracy and justice throughout the world. It's a struggle that James Connolly would certainly recognise. It's a struggle in which all of us must play our part. And Connolly wrote in a lovely work which is called The Legacy, the Dying Socialist to His Son. Yes, son of mine, since history's dawn, two classes stand revealed, the rich and poor, in bitterest war, by deadliest hatred steeled. The one, incarnate greed and crime, disdaining honest toil, had grasped man's common birthright and treasure house, the soil. The land question is an important one for all societies. And the words carved into the Bloody Sunday monument here in Derry say, their epitaph is the continuing struggle for democracy. The theme this year is one world, one struggle. You've seen it on the banners, on the posters, on the badge that I've got here. But the future is the one that belongs to youth and to young people. Young people growing up, going through mental health stress through COVID, going through insecure, underpaid employment, paying too much for university and college education, paying too much for housing, and having too much insecurity in their lives. It's the generation of young people growing up now with all their inspiration, their love of music and their imagination and their wish to live in a decent, equal society where young men and women can achieve equally, where justice can prevail and racism is a thing of the past. So we owe it to them to try and create a world that is fit for the next generation, because it's that generation that's going to be confronted with the environmental disasters that this generation has left behind. And so, in remembering everything that happened in Derry 50 years ago, we can take inspiration from the work of all those people to bring about and achieve a form of justice, but above all, in coming together to create that better world and that better society based on equality and hope rather than inequality, injustice, unaccountable power and greed. To me, Derry is an inspiration. The campaign for the Bloody Sunday Memorial is an inspiration. And to me, it's an enormous honour to be able to be invited here today to share a few thoughts with you. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me today. So I've been told to remain here, it's okay. Because I'm told.
I would like to thank Jeremy for such an uplifting speech and a very fitting way to help us mark the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. I would also now like to call on Tony Doherty to come up to present a token of our appreciation to Jeremy.
Thank you, Monty. The first time I met Jeremy was in 1992. It was January 1992. And he booked a room in Westminster for the launch of the first book. It sort of set the tone, in a sense, and set the pace for the Bloody Sunday Relatives campaign, which was to follow onward. So the first time we met was in the street outside the Houses of Westminster. And I reminded him of it this morning, and he remembered it, and he says, we were young and foolish then. And I said, well, I was young. Jeremy has been a great friend to the families, to the people of Derry, and to the cause of peace and justice in Ireland. And when he did that, he was accused of supporting violence. And when he stood up for civil liberties in Britain and throughout the world, they called him a pinko. And when he stood for workers' rights, they called him a communist, which, by the way, isn't the worst of the insults. However, when he stood up, and still does stand with the Palestinian people, they called him a racist. And the establishment has a habit of turning truth on its head. And I'm glad that Jeremy mentioned Palestine in his speech, because it's a cause that's very dear to my heart, and I'm sure in the hearts of everybody here today. So what I'm going to present them with is a symbol of liberation, which is now worldwide, and which has been emblazoned with the Palestinian colours. And during the, I'm not going to go on all day, right? I'm not the Conor Murphy or Colin Eastwood. A very, very famous Irish socialist, Jim Larkin, 1912, said something which is very, very poignant. And in relation to how you inspire people. And he said, the great only appear great because we're on our knees. Let us rise. You better just say thank you to everybody.
Thank you to everyone that has attended today. And what I would like to say now is that if you join with us tomorrow morning at 9:15 from the Craigan shops as the families do a walk of remembrance. After that, we will have the annual Bloody Sunday Memorial Service at the Monument in Roswell Street at 11 o'clock. And the main event, Beyond the Silence, has now, I'm sure by now most of you know, been moved to the Millennium Forum and to St Colum's Hall. And if you're attending any of these events, please respect the current COVID guidelines. And once again, a very, very big thank you to you and to Jeremy Corbyn for today. Thank you.